Hello and welcome to Secrets of Saturn. I am Jason Lindgren, your host. On this episode, the great debate, round Earth versus flat Earth. On the round Earth side, we have Dr. Johan Oldenkamp. Johan was a professor of knowledge transfer, innovation, and entrepreneurship at the Stenton University. In the autumn of 2008, he consciously resigned that appointment in order to devote all his time, energy, and savings to the further development of holy science. Since then, he lives, by his own choice, without income from a job or unemployment benefit. Before his professorship, Johan worked as a researcher and lecturer at the University of Groningen, as a member of the scientific staff of the Dutch Telematics Institute, as a management consultant at Ernst & Young Consulting and its successors, as a freelance trainer, teacher, consultant, and coach, and as a martial arts teacher. Johan graduated in cognitive psychology. Next, he completed a postgraduate education in knowledge engineering, and he got a PhD for researching how to combine artificial intelligence heuristics with operations research algorithms. On the flat Earth side, we have Watsun Atkinsun, from the coast of Portland, Maine, via Georgia, where he came of age, and Indiana, where he was born. Watsun Atkinsun has been a visual artist and a seeker his entire life, and has a huge back catalog of work in numerous disciplines and motifs. After leaving art school in early 1993 as a young artisan, he was catapulted into a career as a tattooist with a 23-year yield to this day. Over the last 7 years, he has awoken to the dark undercurrents of the control matrix that we are entrenched within. With years of exposure to every topic within the alternative media, in the spring of 2015, he had found himself in the early trenches of the burgeoning new Flat Earth movement. He has researched far and wide, being well-versed in this alarming topic, and is here to represent the truth movement at large and the exponentially growing Flat Earth awakening. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you both here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. It's also a pleasure for me to be in your show.
Well, to start off here, let's do a little bit of introductions. Watson, why don't you go first?
Hello, I'm Watsun Atkinsun. I'm from Portland, Maine, and I'm here representing, I guess, the truth community at large in this flat Earth conversation. So I'm pretty excited about this narrative, and I'm just going to represent a general, overarching pros and cons of both concepts, and hopefully kind of represent the conversation in a really casual and relaxed and polite way. That's my plan.
Excellent. Johan, how about you, sir?
Yeah, that's also my plan. My background is I'm a scientist, but from younger days I was also very fascinated by spirituality. And actually I discovered that the science at the university is not real science. Most of the theories are very based on wrong assumptions. So I discovered that there is something like real science, truthful science, and there's also something like truthful spirituality, because the spirituality that we find in the religions is also not correct. It's very biased. So what I did is I combined sane science and sound spirituality into a wholesome reunion, and that I named Holy Science with WLL. And that is where people can find more about it. holyscience.org is my website. So with WLL and then science.org.
And Johan, that sounds like something we should get into on another show together.
Yeah, I think so too, because I also have a lot of research done about Saturn and especially the Saturn cult. So I think we have a lot in common. But today I think we should stick to the subject that we are here for.
Absolutely. Now, as far as challenging the mainstream view of things, Watson, what was the thing that woke you up to all this?
And again, similar to Johan, I kind of come from a science background, and I have a long, rich history of being science-oriented, and it's safe to say I was always somewhat of a materialist and also a mystic and a spiritualist, and I was always flirting with both an interest in both mysticism and spirituality, and also with science and materialism. So I kind of was, one of those kind of noetic scientist types, what's that show from years ago, Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, What in the Bleep Show, or that whole series of that Dean Radin was a part of. Like I was one of those mystic scientist kind of guys. So when I'm coming at this narrative of this flat Earth thing, basically kind of as with a science-oriented, very logical brain, using very matter-of-fact tenets and stuff, and just using logic, reason, and common sense, and in part, using kind of the scientific method to kind of get a handle on this. But The way that I came into the Flat Earth movement was a long, rich history of being involved in the truth community at large, or the alternative media community. I've been pretty heavily invested in this since the 2008, 2009. I think a lot of people can confess to having trigger documentaries like The Zeitgeist and Loose Change at the time, and Esoteric Agenda and Chematica during that era. Really kind of jarred me out of my slumber. And to say the least, I got heavily invested in researching a lot of this, the undercurrents of the alternative media scene, with also a long kind of background in the 90s and stuff. When I was younger as an artist and stuff in the 90s, I would flirt with Coast to Coast and Art Bell, and was somewhat well versed in like William Cooper's Behold a Pale Horse and some of the undercurrents of the fringe, community. But I kind of got distracted with it, got heavily involved in my career and with music and a lot of other things, and family and kids, and then I kind of got reintroduced to it. So by the time the spring of last year came up in 2015, I had already been pretty entrenched into 6, 7, 8 years of pretty deep exposure to a lot of these fringe topics. So I'm well versed, to say the least, in a lot of different topics. So when the Flat Earth thing came up, I was already kind of geared for it. I'd already passed numerous Rubicons, so to speak, and I was kind of like, I saw it with really clear eyes, especially from a perspective that was very guarded and suspicious of the control matrix that's deceived us on innumerable other topics that we could go in at length on, innumerable other shows. So by the time this Flat Earth came up, it was a very easy step for me to just look at the facts and see what the arguments were, because I was already in distrust of a system that had lied and deceived us in so many other ways. So that's why when I came into this, in a way, I kind of fell back in love with science, because the scientific method, which is, the basic 5 tenets of the scientific method, is to ask questions, make a hypothesis, do an experiment, collect data, draw conclusions, and using empirical observation, which is something that, comes from just using your own senses to look out into the world and to speculate and use the scientific method to harness and reclaim science in an honest and sincere and genuine way, from like the perspective of a working class layman who's not affiliated with academia or peer reviewed, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of, in a way, felt this overwhelming sense of joy, because I felt alienated from the science community because I wasn't peer reviewed, and I didn't go to study high math, and I didn't have access to astronomy telescopes and things like that. So I'd always felt like it was like a lost love or something. But now, in a way, here I am right in the trenches of the 2016 era, and the Flat Earth movement for me is one where I'm able to use the scientific method and to use empirical observation to get a handle on this conversation. So I'm coming at it from that perspective, and not from a spiritual or religious perspective at all, not faith-based, but logic-based.
Awesome. Johan, go ahead and let's hear about you.
Yeah, well, when I was studying psychology at the university, I wanted to know what that word means. And psychology literally means the logic of the psyche. But what is then the psyche? And the psyche is actually the soul. But I learned hardly anything about the soul at the university. I only learned things about the mind and about the heart and all the problems that can occur by our reasoning or thinking or whatever. And, so what is now really the psyche? And most people confuse it with the spirit. So we have three essential subjects here: the spirit, the soul, and the mind. And mainstream science does not know anything to tell us about either the soul nor the spirit. So that's that. They say it belongs to the level of metaphysics, and I think that's true. But I think real science from ancient Greece was all about metaphysics, much more than about physics. So since then, I took all on board, so to say, also that part: alchemy, alchemistic science, and metaphysics, because I think that's very important as well. And that's how I started. Actually, I started very young, in my 20s already.
Wonderful. Now, going back to you, Watsun, what challenged your mainstream worldview to make you lean towards the flat Earth?
I think when it actually happened amazingly, when I was driving across the flat plains of Canada, which I just recently learned that they discovered that Kansas is actually technically more flat than actually a pancake. So literally, it's flatter than a pancake. There's some kind of a test they did. So as I'm driving across Kansas, I was listening to a talk radio, the Higher Side Chat show, and which I had already devoured a lot of, years and years of just listening to podcasts. I stumbled upon this flat Earth conversation on this show, and initially I brushed it aside, laughed it away, but I always listen to everything. I'm kind of obsessive about that. I'll devour every topic and every thing that a show might present. And by the end of the show, I was literally screaming out the window in disbelief that this topic was compelling and reasonable. And it really blew me away. I'll never forget the moment of listening as I'm driving across Kansas, looking out at the flat plains of Kansas. So immediately I basically went on a month-long road trip on a tattoo tour across the Southwest. When I came back home, I focused all my energy into fixating on this topic. And to say that I awakened to this or focused my guns into the trenches, the flat Earth community, is an understatement. I literally devoured every document, every personality, every show, every podcast, every book. It literally completely blew my mind. In part, it was because my love of science and my love of the cosmos, my love of deep space, and my love of the cosmic riddle I felt like I was reclaiming that in a way and re-grabbing and getting closer to like a Gnostic truth. So I think what really challenged it when I came back, I immediately went up to one of the first empirical tests that I did is I went up to an observation point in downtown Portland, Maine. It's an old observatory that's been around for a few hundred years. It's like a landmark observatory. I went to the top of it on a clear day, and I looked out across the entire state of Maine and into New Hampshire from downtown Portland, Maine, and I could see the entire facade of the presidentials. Not just the tip of it, but the entire facade. And at that point, I had already learned about that spherical trigonometry has an equation where there's an 8-inch drop per mile squared from the distance of the observer, and it was something like 70 miles. This is a general points here, but it was roughly 70 miles away, and the length of the presidential mountains of Mount Washington is 6,000 feet. And using their calculations, I should have only been able to see the top third of it. 4,000 feet of this mountain should have been occulted and hidden behind the curvature of the earth. But on the contrary, I saw the entire facade, not only the entire facade with the Appalachian Mountains receding in both directions, but I could also see Mount Katahdin, which is at equal distance, in a northwest direction. And it was that moment, that pivotal moment, that everything completely fell apart and collapsed. And I became, in part, seriously invested in discovering this flat Earth conversation. And I think that's the biggest Achilles heel of the system, is that exponentially all over the flat plane, people are observing things at a distance that they should not be able to see on the spherical globe. Cities off in the distance, islands, mountains, light towers. And one of the most amazing things is if you see a city off in the distance, it's not receding away from you or tilting away from you, which how it would look as it curved away. You actually see it perpendicular to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the thing for me. What I tell everyone is go look for yourself, especially here in Portland, and observe for yourself, and you can see the entire length of the presidentials. And it's if you can contain the cognitive dissonance and not fall into the programming and the mind control and the manipulation and the indoctrination that we've been taught that we live on a sphere, then you can look across this beautiful plane at what you actually really see, which is a stunning, flat, stationary terra firma with, as the crow flies, the beautiful mountains off in the distance, exactly how they are. That was the moment for me. And from there, the floodgates open up, an avalanche of more research, and then I immediately, since then, I've flown 6 times, always flying during the day, always getting a window seat, and every single time, I'd like to talk about that later, but the next anecdotal empirical observation will be my huge epiphany sitting in an iron bird 40,000 feet up in a plane. I'll end there, and we'll come back to that when the time is right.
Well, Johan, you're representing the traditional heliocentric view of the universe. what do you have to say about what Watsun just threw out, and how do you counter the points that a lot of the flat Earth people bring up about the mathematics involved?
Yeah, well, I didn't do all the mathematics myself, but I have 6 main issues with the flat Earth. And Watsun talked about the scientific method. Well, if you say that there are only white swans, then you need only to show one black swan in order to disprove that claim. And that's actually the story for me. If you say the Earth is flat, then I found 6 very hard reasons why it cannot be flat. So for me, the discussion ends there. But I know there are very strange things going on, absolutely, and maybe I can explain a few things. Example, what is actually light, and why does the sun look much closer than it officially is? I can explain all that, but then you have to step first away from a kind of paradigm, or I prefer to actually call it a dogma, because we jump to conclusions when we do not understand things, and then we immediately say, well, it is this or that. I think we should have an open mind and put all the evidence on the table, and then have a second thought about it, and maybe there is another way of looking at it, or maybe another solution. So I think the main reason that I did not enter that discussion is because to me it's the answer is really simple. But I've encountered many people who are very fanatic in the flat Earth assumption. And they are even more annoying to me than Jehovah's Witnesses, I can tell you. And they are very persistent, and they try to somehow, they could become even verbally aggressive to me. And for me, I don't get that. Yeah, if I am right, then I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But why do you make such an issue about it? So I think we should just have an open mind. What I would like to do is I put my evidence on the table. And Watsun can give a reply to that, and he can do the very same, and I will have a reply to that, and maybe then together the 3 of us can have a kind of solution for the moment, or we just call it a draw. That's also a possibility. I think that's the best way to go forward. Just share the scientific evidence that we found, the observations.
Absolutely. So, Watsun, why don't you go ahead and give the first point that you would like to bring out about why you believe the Earth is flat, and what is backing up that point of view for you?
Okay, it's 2 things, and there's an immensely rich amount of different topics that we could go into, but I always like to kind of keep it as simple as possible with this at first. And I think the basic question here, the philosophical question, is: do we live on a sphere ball? Do we live on a round ball? Do we live in a heliocentric system? Or do we live in a flat plane, a geocentric terra firma system? And the basic question in essence is it flat? Is it Euclidean geometry? Or is it round? Is it spherical geometry? So what I see when I look out, when I use my 5 senses and my ability, again, to use the term empirical observation, and when I use that, when I harness my logic, reason, and common sense, when I look out across the plane, or when I look out across at far distances, it appears that I'm looking out over a plane. And the second anecdotal information is the first one being seeing long distances, at ground level, at sea level, seeing things that are so far away that you shouldn't be able to see them. They should be hidden around the curvature of the Earth. The other one that's amazing, and it's to me another Achilles heel of this postmodern era, or I like to say post-historic, because I feel that history is based on monumental lies. So in a way, we're in this post-historic era, is that they gift us the ability with a small amount of fiat currency to fly up in one of their iron birds and get the most beautiful perch at 35, 40, 45,000 feet up in an airplane, and to look out for yourself, again, out at the horizon. And what you see is a horizon line that completely ramps up to the eye of the observer and completely goes in a huge 360 degree circumference all the way around you. And the one thing that will just completely blow your mind is when you look out your window on the left and see the horizon line ramping up to your level, and then you are looking out the tiny little fuselage window on the other window, you see the same horizon line completely level on the other side of the plane, and you connect those 2 points with your observation, your singular, sentient, mystical, of empirical observation of pure consciousness sitting there in the plane. You connect your point with those other 2 data points, those 2 horizon lines that are roughly 200 miles in each direction. And what do you get? A straight, perfectly straight line. I went to art school. My father was a draftsman. He worked for General Motors. I come from a lineage of artisans and draftsmen. I grew up with compasses and rulers and graph paper. All of my artwork, I literally use compasses, rulers, and things like that. I'm a structural illustrator. I work with that type of math, that type of thinking. And when I look out there and I see that, I connect those 3 data points. It's like it's a horizon line, and you can map it on a piece of paper, and I could illustrate that with. So in a way, I think, to me, that was the big crushing moment where the house of cards completely fell down. So the essence of my general argument, outside of, if there's space or if there's a firmament or what the sun and the moon are made of or how far away they are, the basic essence that we need to distill this down to is it flat or is it curved? And in a spherical a ball beneath us, that ball should recede off its space, and I should be looking down at a huge ball. And at that horizon level, at that horizon line vanishing point, the horizon of the Earth should be receding down and away from me, and I should not be able to see it through the other fuselage window on the other side. So again, I'm coming to this with just that basic observation point, and to me, personally, for me, it's overwhelming proof that I'm looking out at a flat plane and not a ball Earth.
Interesting. All right, how do you feel about that, Johan?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to get that high up in the air with authentic pictures. So I don't know. I've not been that high, and I do know that NASA is lying big time to us. It's never a straight answer, but I go even further. I say it's neither any space adventure either, because NASA goes up maybe to 400 miles maximum, 300, 400 miles, and that's it. So they've not been further away from the planet ever, at least not with humans on board. So I don't know what to trust. And I know it seems like it's very flat. And we also should take into account the way our eyes process information. Yeah, maybe if something is curved, our eyes somehow make it straight, because actually we don't even know what light is actually. And somehow our eyes are able to process light information, and somehow our brain is making an image out of that. And maybe there is something in that process as well. But later on, maybe I can go deeper to that, because light is it's a very strange phenomenon, and the universities do not tell us what light really is.
Well, Johan, have you ever traveled just on a commercial jet?
Of course.
Right. I have as well, and I'm not trying to take any sides here. It looked curved to me. I've flown all over the United States, but I know the immediate counter-argument to that is that the way the windows are put in a commercial liner, that it distorts the field of view. So, and that's probably true, just because it has to withstand the pressures. The pressure changes from the ground all the way up to however many thousands of feet you are in the air. But it always looked curved to me, and that's all I really can say about it.
I think in part that might be true with the windows, but one thing that doesn't change is that the horizon line ramps up in a convex way, like you're looking down at a big bowl, and it ramps up and is level with the eye of the observer. That's the anomaly that that needs to be focused on, is that it's level when you look out the left side and the right side. And if you had access to the cockpit in the front, I guarantee it would be level in that direction. If you had a vantage point to look in all 4 directions in a 360-degree perch, you would be completely level. And I think it would be at that moment that you would just see a flat plane. But the problem is that you only have this tiny one little window and one fuselage curved window. I do believe, I have noticed now that because of that curved fuselage window, that it does slightly curve at the edges because of the window, but overwhelmingly it's pretty level, and it's level with your observation on both sides, and you can imagine it is on all three sides, wrapping 360 degrees around. That to me is overwhelming demonstrable proof that it appears to be flat and level. The other anomaly that's interesting up in a plane is that you don't see the Earth spinning below you at 1,000 miles per hour. Somehow the Coriolis effect doesn't affect planes, and when you're up there traveling at 500 miles an hour, the plane is getting pulled along with the gravity of the atmosphere, so you don't pick up on the fact that the Earth is spinning around you. You just get carried through this gravity vacuum of the atmosphere, and it's not perceptible that the Earth is spinning underneath you.
Right. Now, Johan, am I correct in thinking that the centrifugal force of the movement of the planet is why humans wouldn't perceive that?
Yeah, there are many reasons. That might be one of them. Yeah, but to me, it's not really hard evidence so far. It has to do with perception, and maybe there is some trickery going on with our eyes. So I would like to add one of my arguments, and I would really love to hear what Watsun has to say about that.
Okay, go ahead.
When I look, I'm a stargazer. I look at stars a lot. When I'm on the northern hemisphere and I look at the stars, then I can see that they are going around the star called Polaris in the Big Dipper, at the back of the Big Dipper, and they all go around. Yeah, they all go around in a counterclockwise way, if I'm correct. But on the southern hemisphere, it seems that all the stars go around, something that is close to the Southern Cross. That is the constellation that is also in the flag of Australia. And there the stars go around in a clockwise fashion. So it's very strange to me how you can have a flat Earth where on one side the stars above your head go around in a clockwise way, and somewhere on the other part of that, some flat pancake, the stars go around in another way. And I cannot see, for instance, the stars on the southern hemisphere. I cannot see the Southern Cross from the Netherlands, where I'm located. So I cannot see how a flat Earth model is consistent with the movements of the stars.
This is a great point to make, and it's really not one of my strong points when it comes to the anomalies of this inquiry. I've never been to the southern hemispheres, and I've never seen them spin in a contrary direction. My first sentiment is that it doesn't seem to be that. It might be one of those things similar to the Coriolis effect, where they say that water in a bowl will rotate in one direction in the northern hemisphere and the other direction in the southern hemisphere because of the rotation of the Earth. It seems like that myth around the Coriolis effect seems to be manufactured and made up, and it doesn't seem to be based in demonstrable proof. And it just makes me wonder if that could also be the case with the southern hemisphere region. I do know that star, the supposedly the pole star of the southern hemisphere, can only actually technically be seen with a very powerful telescope that only maybe the Vatican or the Jesuit order has access to, and that it's a hypothetical North Pole star. The name escapes me what it is, but in part because of that, it just makes me wonder if there is actually a rotation like they say there is. I'd have to research more into it. And at this point, I'd like to, maybe slightly retreat from that particular inquiry. But one of the things I'd like to bring up on that same note when it comes to stars, and when we deal with this issue of parallax, which is, subtle differences between the stars, is that there appears to be, on the contrary, when you look up to the North Star Polaris, that it's rotating around in a way that's completely a perfect circle. If you do a time lapse of footage with cameras during at night, it appears that the entire night sky is rotating over and above and around the North Pole stars. North Pole. But one thing really quick, I've got this quote here, and I've been really wanting to reference it here. But let me just say this really quick. And this is one of the things, again, I think that is, to me, could be proof. And if you can imagine that the Earth is spinning around at 1,000 miles an hour, and it's rotating and flying 67,000 miles around the heliocentric, sun-centered system, and that when we look out at night, the sun's always hitting us on the day side, but the night side is looking up into the night sky, looking out and away from the night, out and away in the opposite direction of the sun. When you rotate all the way around the Earth at 180 degrees 6 months later, how is it possible that you can see the same exact night sky at a dramatically different vantage point from in that time where you rotate around the sun? And this really, let me just read this really quick here. NASA and modern astronomy say the Earth is a giant ball tilted back, wobbling and spinning 1,000 miles per hour around its central axis, traveling 67,000 mile per hour circles around the sun, spiraling 500 mile per hour around the Milky Way, while the entire galaxy rockets a ridiculous 67 million miles per hour through the universe, with all those motions originating from the alleged Big Bang cosmogenic explosion 14 billion years ago. That's a grand total of 670,568,000 miles per hour in several different directions. We're all supposedly speeding along it simultaneously, yet no one has ever seen, felt, heard, measured, or proven a single one of those motions to exist whatsoever. So when it comes to the night sky, when you look up at, say, at the winter solstice on December 21st, 6 months later, when you completely travel all the way around the sun at 180 degree vantage point, and you look out again on the what is that, the winter solstice, on the spring solstice, how is it possible that you can see the same exact night sky with the North Pole directly above us? To me, anomalies like that begs the question if we're actually level and stationary and the sky above us just is rotating above us, just like Occam's razor suggests. That's exactly what we perceive of.
Well, I have an interesting thought on that, and I don't want to speak for Johan, of course, but the way I've always understood traditional astrophysics is that everything, including the Earth, is in this giant celestial dance. So everything is in constant motion, and basic physics shows that everything indeed is in constant motion, and it's all related to frequency. But also it's a matter of perspective that the universe is so incredibly vast compared to the tiny Earth in relation to that. But Johan, why don't you go ahead and let's hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think Watson is not familiar with the difference between a sidereal year and a synodic year. And maybe that's the reason why he's confused.
Go ahead and elaborate on that.
Yeah, well, the sidereal year is or the sidereal cycle. There you take the stars as a point of reference, and that's a different year than when we take the solstices as a reference. There's a tiny difference, but that tiny difference is just enough to make it completely understandable. So that's why you have, for instance, the daytime on December 21. Well, exactly what you were just describing. It's a well-known phenomena. So you need to understand what is actually a year. How do you define a year? And if you define it like this, then there is no confusion at all. It all makes sense to me.
Does the mathematics behind it all, do they work out?
Yeah, they do. There's no problem there. Otherwise, it would have been already on the table. The only point is that mainstream science talks about gravity as the main force, and I think that's bogus. I think that's nonsense. I think it has to do with electricity and magnetism.
You're referencing the electric universe theory?
Yeah, that is more reasonable, because then you can also have very quick changes in a short time, like Velikovsky was trying to explain. So that makes sense. But there's nothing wrong with the dates. I've done a lot of research myself, and that makes sense. So to me, there's no confusion.
I just wanted to mention, too, that I meant to say the summer solstice earlier in relationship to the winter solstice. But I totally kind of understand the general sentiment you're saying. But I think the point where I'm coming from as a draftsman and an artisan and somebody who's well-versed in perspective, when I look out at these two vantage points at a 6-month difference, I don't see how even remotely possible to see the same night sky when you're looking out at different points into the Milky Way galaxy or into the universe. To me, that is, again, appears to be Occam's razor, which suggests that we're just seeing the same night sky every night and it's not changing or spinning through space at all.
Well, my thoughts on that, Watson, is that the Earth in relation to how huge space is supposed to be, and I can't prove if any of this is real, of course, this is just the traditional thinking. The Earth is so tiny in relation to these vast distances that, of course, the minute changes from being on one side of a planet to the other are not going to be anywhere near as perceptible as one might think.
And I totally understand the sentiment, but there would still, I think, be some type of calculable, minuscule parallax difference between the stars, especially with us. I don't see how the night sky can stay completely static and stay the same over hundreds, if not thousands of years.
I don't think it does, actually. Johan, do you happen to know this? And I could have sworn I remember this from middle school astronomy class, but hasn't it already been observed that the stars' distances have changed over the time that they've been recorded?
Yeah, what they do, they work with the Doppler effect and things like that, and then they come with estimates, but it's all very trickery. But the general conclusion is that the universe is getting bigger and bigger, and all stars are going away from us.
That's the Hubble constant we're referring to, correct?
Yeah, exactly. But there are so many things and assumptions. Actually, we don't even know what light is, and my conclusion is light is something different than what we think. And if we base our measurement of distance on light and the so-called speed of light, it's supposedly fixed, but I think that's all not true. So I can fully go along with Watson if he says that something is very fishy about us. But we should
completely agree with that one. I'm completely in agreement that things are very, very unusual, and their anomalies run rampant in every persuasion.
Yeah. Can I add another one?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you can fly 3 times a week from Sydney in Australia to Santiago in Chile, and that would be very far apart on the flat Earth diagram or the map that I've seen. Yeah, that's similar to the one that is used by the United Nations. I think that's the general map everybody agrees on. But if that map is correct, then the Boeing that is flying straight over the USA 3 times a week goes with a speed that is almost Mach 3, because it's going then 3,200 kilometers an hour, and that is more than 1,000 kilometers per hour faster than the Concorde. And actually, it's a normal Boeing. So I don't think it's possible to fly in 12 hours in a flat Earth model from Chile to from Sydney to Santiago. So to me, this is also a second black swan that I present here.
Isn't it also true that depending upon which direction you're going, it will actually take longer to get to your location, even if it's the same distance, and burn more fuel because you have to fight the winds?
That's another issue, but the point is the distance here in a globe model, then you come up with a speed of about 800, 900 kilometers an hour, and that's the normal speed for a Boeing. But if you use the flat Earth and you then calculate the average speed of flying, then you come up with something that is faster than a military jet. So that is really not possible.
So basically what you're saying is that the math doesn't work out for the commonly used flat Earth model, that you should be crossing those distances a lot quicker than you actually are observing.
Yeah, Sydney and Santiago must be much closer together than the flat Earth map that most people are using. So I try to find, of course, the two extremes and then see if it's possible to have a direct flight. And this is actually possible. With Qantas Airlines, you can fly 3 times a week. And that, to me, is also showing that there is a much closer distance between Sydney and Santiago than the flat Earth is suggesting.
Right, and there could be I think the truth could be somewhere in between the two arguments, because I'm under the suspicion now that even the map that we have the one that the flat Earth map, the flat Earth map that the flat Earth community generally embraces, which is, in essence, similar to the United Nations occulted hidden flat Earth map in plain sight, type of map, the azimuthal equidistant map, that one might be fallacious and wrong, and we might not have something that we can do correct math on.
Well, Watson, let's start with that map in itself. Where did that originally come from? Since so many people do embrace that is the one I see constantly being put out there, what's the basis of that being accepted?
It's my favorite map, and I think overwhelmingly it's one of the, a pretty powerful map. It was actually illustrated by Alex Gleason, and I'm not really sure exactly the year, but in the 1890s, and he wrote a really powerful book, is the Bible from Heaven. And it's got, you have to keep in mind a lot of those people during that time, were using the Bible in part, but a lot of these people like Alex Gleason were also scientists using math too. So half the argument is scripture based, and the other half is science or math based. So that particular map he did is beautiful, stunning map, and you can actually download copies of it. It's all over the place. But yeah, Alex Gleason was the one that did it, and shockingly, amazingly, it's the same exact and similar map that the United Nations have used in their logo, with the occulted flat Earth map that I mentioned hidden within their logo, with the 33 sections of the bullseye target over the front there, and a map that I recently kind of reclaimed and redesigned and gifted to Eric DeBay for the Flat Earth Research Society, and came up with a logo for him that added the extra arrows to suggest that they're possibly hiding more land, and I put the transcendental sun and the moon over the top of it to suggest that that there was a connection now with the astrology of the luminaries above. But yeah, so there's a whole rich tradition of really beautiful, stunning flat Earth artwork and flat Earth cosmology maps and drawings and artwork that go back in every culture for millennia. And one of my favorite hobbies is to dig these things out and find them. I'm actually in the process right now of designing a new map for this new era right now. So so apologies on that one.
It's just something I would like to throw out there for both of you to consider. I've looked at that map, and I also looked up the stereotypical Masonic altar map, and they're very similar. Very, very similar, in fact. And I just want everyone to kind of take that in and do that little bit of homework for yourself.
Yeah, and we don't need to go down that one, but I think that in essence, if this does prove to be true, I think it's a Masonic hoax that probably goes back 500 years, that's rooted in some high, Jesuit priest order who came up with this insane, brilliant, stunning, alarming concept, and they've seduced us all into thinking we live on a ball so that they could hide land and hide the source from us, etc., etc. But we'll save that for the end of the show.
And Johan, how do you feel about the map that's used and just the traditional world map being accurate?
Yeah, well, there is so much disinformation going on, so it's very tough to decide if something is really helpful or not. So I don't know about the maps, and if there are all the maps. I've studied the work of Piri Reis. He was from Turkey, and he made maps that were so accurate about Southern America and about the routes, and even the top of Antarctica was on his map. And that makes sense. So how can somebody in those days have such an accurate map? Maybe people knew more than we know. Maybe our history is different. That's all possible. But to me, it's if you look up from the USA, especially from Washington and so on, there you should see if the flat Earth model is correct. You should see 3 times a week a plane that is going 4 times as fast, going south in the direction. And if you don't see that, 3 times a week, and something else is going. Yeah,
I wish I could see that. That sounds like a fantastic sight. But I think what we have, the problem is that all the data is wrong. They've given us false maps, false ball maps, false flat maps. I don't believe any of the maps. In part, I think the whole things are red herrings to a certain extent, to use a logical fallacy. And I think that they're taking us down a garden path here and distracting us with some of these topics, like the controversy around these flight paths and stuff like that. But I think, again, we can we could try to debate on that stuff, but it's in essence, I think the argument is if it's flat or round, and I think the crux of this argument should be proving what it appears to be flat and level, and not what the what type of map it is, or whether it's a this map or that map, or this way or that way. So again, I like this argument, or I like thinking about some of these things, but I always fall back into default mode, which is, to me, I like to focus on the proof, the overwhelming proof that it appears to be flat, and seeing images off at seeing mountains and cities off at a distance, and seeing the horizon rise to the eye of the observer at 40,000 feet is overwhelming, empirical proof that it appears to be flat.
Now, the one thing I think that we all have common ground on here, and the reason why we're all here in the first place, is because we do question the mainstream viewpoint of things that's been put out by the social engineers of this world. And I think that's our common ground, is that we're challenging things, and we're just truth seekers. And whether our perspectives end up at the end of the day being exactly the same, I think we're all really coming at it from the same point of view as, hey, something doesn't seem right. Would I say that's correct between all of us?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Many things are deliberately wrong, so there's no debate about that.
Right. And that being said, what I'd like to lead into is this whole flat Earth, round Earth debate is causing a huge amount of friction in the truth movement, or the awakening movement, whatever you want to call it, globally, if you want to forgive me for using that term. But people everywhere, this is causing a lot of rifts, a lot of infighting, and honestly, what it seems like to me is this is just another distraction that's thrown out there to throw you off the real trail of pursuing truth and trying to get at reality. And I'd like to know your thoughts on that, gentlemen.
Yeah, but I have some more points I would like to make, because then I have it off my chest, so to say, and then we can have an open debate, if that's good for you.
Yeah, let's go ahead and finish the points you have to make in your defense, and then we'll come back to this topic in a few minutes.
Yeah, I just want to put them on the table. We don't have to have a long debate, but then you know at least where I'm standing at this moment.
Certainly.
There is, for instance, a single-handed non-stop sailing race. It's every 4 years, and it starts in France and it comes back in France too, and it goes around the Antarctica continent. And the sailors are not allowed to go more down than 60 degrees latitude south. So if they go closer, then they take a kind of shortcut in the spherical model. Of course, I have to say that. But if it would be on a flat Earth, and then you would calculate their distance, they would outrun the most powerful speedboat with their sailing boat. So that makes a little bit. I cannot see how you can have that sailing contest every 4 years on a flat Earth. That doesn't make any sense. So that's the second point, or the third point I want to bring in. And the fourth one is, if I see a picture from the moon, and I compare that with a picture that is taken from the southern hemisphere, then I can see that there's a 90-degree turn of the moon. So actually the face of the moon looks a little bit upside down, and that's logical in a spherical model, but it's not logical in a flat model. And then the fifth one I want to make is the length of the shadows. How can you have different length of shadows on a flat plane? That doesn't make any sense either. And of course on my list is the Coriolis effect, because I've seen a scientific experiment very precisely done, and they do find the different rotation directions, and of course it's also a well-known weather phenomenon. So these are my 6 points, and yeah, if Watson wants to comment on any of them, would be good.
I would love to comment. I would absolutely love to. Those are some great points you made, and some questions that I had early on with this inquiry too. On the note of the sailing, on the thing, I think that's a similar question to the distance problem that we have with not really knowing what the correct map is. But would you agree that that you could sail around the ball model as easily as you could sail around a flat spherical model too? Do you see?
Yeah, of course, that's possible. But the point is, if the Antarctica is the border of the flat plane, then the distance they have when they go around it, close to that border, that is huge. That's huge. That's 100,000 kilometers or something. So.
Yeah, I think that might be a misconception. They're probably staying very close to the inner latitude lines, and they're kind of hugging the islands and the different continents as they wrap around it. I don't think when they go out into the farthest, like the 65 latitude line there, where they're forbidden to go any further because of the Antarctic Treaty and the military that keeps people from going farther than that line to keep people from Antarctica. I think that when they wrap around the southern tip of, say, of Chile, and when they wrap around say the Australia area and the southern tip of Africa, the rest of the time they're holding really close to those continents, and it's not like they're traveling 67,000 miles around the ice wall perimeter. It'd be different. I would love to see, if they would allow it, is a race around Antarctica, which on the traditional model, I think it's something like 12 to 16,000 miles around that ice rock at the bottom, where in the flat model, it's more like 65 to 67,000 miles around. So it would be, fantastic if they would just do a race around Antarctica, and then the numbers would be much different. So I understand the general sentiment, but I think it's just it's hard to calculate the math on something like that, because we might not have a handle on what the real geography and what the real maps are. So, but great question. The second one, on the note of the moon, when there's a 90 degree turn when you go into the southern regions, like if you're up in North America or the northern regions, and you see the moon in one direction, and then the people from Australia and South America and Southern Africa regions, they're looking up and they see the moon at a 90 degree turn it works, well to a certain extent in the heliocentric ball model context and argument, but also at the same time, if you can imagine putting an image of a moon in the center, on a ceiling in the center of a room where like a light would be, you tape a Xerox copy of the moon to the ceiling, and everywhere when you go from one side of the room to the other side, it changes a 90 degree orientation. So it's a matter of perspective on where you are on the Earth, on what the moon's going to look like. So from a 180 degree difference, it's going to have a 90 degree shift in its appearance. So again, it's one of those arguments that holds up in both the ball model and the flat model. And a lot of these arguments, which makes it really challenging, is that they're relatively correct in either model. That's why a lot of the it's really hard to get a handle on a lot of this, a lot of these arguments. On the note of the Coriolis effect, you had mentioned the shadows on the flat plane. That's another crazy notion too. If you think about the sun rays that come down from the sun, especially on a cloudy day, and you see that beautiful break of the sun rays coming down in this fan-like effect. I believe that that's more proof that the sun is considerably much more closer, I'd say 3,000 miles above the surface of the Earth instead of 93 million miles away, because if the sun was that far away and it was as large as they say it is and as tiny as we are, we would be blasted with sunlight that would be coming all with the same parallel direction. So all the sunlight coming through the clouds would have the same vertical orientation, and we would not see them sprayed out, like a Illuminati pyramid is, which is one of the things I think that they occult in that Illuminati pyramid with the all-seeing eye, is that's the sun up there, radiating down in its stereotropic, relationship to the Earth. So again, it's one of those things that's tricky. But what I see, using my observation and especially my rich history as a draftsman, and using 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point perspective, when I look up at the sun and I see a singular light ray coming out, I don't see light rays. I see lines of data. And when I connect those to a point, if I was to have a sextant, a traditional sextant, and would do the math and the calculations on that, I guarantee, just like a lot of astronomers and mathematicians have been doing for centuries, if not millennia, that the sun appears to be very, very close to the surface of the Earth and might actually only be 32 miles, 33 miles across, and only about 3,000 miles above. So again, depending on what model you're looking at, brings dramatically different, answers. On the note of the Coriolis effect, this is another one of those very curious things. What I find frustrating about it, and I understand the idea of it with weather systems and with things like Folkhart's pendulum and things like that. But the big anomaly for me, or the big smoking gun about this, is that they always argue about how the Coriolis effect snipers have to take in the Coriolis effect when they shoot rounds across long distances. And if that's the case, why aren't we also calculating the Coriolis effect for airplanes and flying objects and helicopters, especially airplanes landing on runways and stuff? You think that the Coriolis effect, if it actually affects a bullet which travels much faster than a plane, you would think that the Coriolis effect would also affect pilots. And why aren't they calculating that as they're flying down and landing on runways? There'd be things like, if the Coriolis effect really existed, it would be almost impossible to land jumbo jets on runways without disastrous accidents.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that pilots do make minor course corrections throughout the course of especially a long journey.
In relationship to the Coriolis effect?
Well, just in general, that while they have flight patterns already pre-mapped out, I do believe that they have to make minor adjustments due to several variables.
Yeah, if they probably do have to do minor adjustments, but if they were actually curving around a ball, traveling at 500 miles per hour, and with the circular trigonometry or the circular distance that they give us of the Earth being 25,000 miles in diameter, they would have to make very dramatic shifts, pointing the nose of the airplane down to compensate for that curvature at such a speed. And on the contrary, if you talk to pilots, or if there's some pilots that have come out and spoke about this, and I've also spoke with pilots when I do fly, I ask them if they have to adjust their plane, or if they just get to a certain level and just sit back and let the planes automatically autopilot, and they just sit back and watch the gauges as they stay completely level with the plane of the Earth. So again, these are great questions. But from my observation and my general study, it appears that the Coriolis effect might just be a fanciful myth.
Johan, I'd love to hear some more on this, because this sounds like something that need to be taken into effect, but I'd love to know some more scientific background on the phenomena.
And there are two boys, one is in the UK and the other one is in Australia, and they did the very exact experiment. You can find it on YouTube. And they also have a kind of humor, very good sense of humor. So the guy in Australia puts the picture on YouTube upside down, so that you believe that he's on the upside down world. But anyway, they did it very controlled. They had a bathtub and a very small twist underneath to open it, so there were no disturbing factors. And they did it, and they showed it by putting colors into the water. And then you can clearly see there is a counterclockwise movement on the northern hemisphere in the UK, and there was a clockwise movement for the guy who did it in Australia. And those YouTube videos, they relate to each other. If you want, I can look them up, and I can.
There could be an electromagnetic effect happening, to talk about the electric universe. Why does this have to be because of the spin of the Earth? I think it might be, we could be in a torsion energy field, and there could be an electromagnetic, torus energy system that's running the whole show, and those type of forces could be causing subtle effects of water rotating in opposite directions. But what's so troubling about that thought, or that using that proof as proof of the Coriolis effect, is that it still doesn't deal with the effect that snipers have to calculate Coriolis effect when they shoot people at a distance, or they shoot targets at a distance, but planes don't have to ever calculate the Coriolis effect at all. So why is there a double standard with snipers and with drainage, water rolling down drains, but not with huge jumbo jets with hundreds of thousands of millions of people flying every year that could put their lives in danger. It's not even brought up. It's not even taught. It's only taught to snipers.
Yeah, I don't know that, Watson, but I can imagine a little bit because, yeah, you have to be very precise, and a bullet, I think, is more easy influenced by wind than a big plane. But maybe that's not true either. But I'm not a sniper. I've not done the sniper school, so I don't know. But right. I know this experiment. If you want, I can send the videos afterwards, and you can put the links there. Yeah, and to me that's a really good thing. But also all the weather people, how do you call them, forecasters, whatever, they work with the weather. They know this too. And in the flat Earth, yeah, then you have to make a circle. You have an inner circle, which is then the northern hemisphere, and an outer part of that circle, the outer ring, so to say, is then the southern hemisphere. And it's, yeah, you cannot explain why that effect suddenly changes when you cross that circle, because in the flat plane, that circle has no meaning, but in the sphere it has a meaning, because it goes. Yeah.
Let's run with this idea that the electromagnetism, that the electric universe is going to be proven to be correct more so than gravity, or what's been speculated with Newton through Kepler and Einstein and all the astrophysics of this modern era, is that if it's electromagnetism and the sun and the moon are oscillating in a corkscrew relationship back and forth between the Tropic of Capricorn in the southern regions and then spiraling upwards 6 months later to the Tropic of Cancer in the summer regions, they pass by the equatorial equator, which is the middle point between the two tropics. If this is an electromagnetic universe, then maybe whatever is the mechanisms that, again, hypothetically speaking, from a flat model orientation, is that from that perspective, what might actually be fueling and running and the mechanics around the sun and the moon and all the planets, or the planet star luminaries and all the stars above, might be some kind of electromagnetic, metaphysical, transcendental science that we have absolutely no comprehension of. Is that, and in that middle point, that equatorial region between the two tropics, there could be an energy shift that's that normal modern instruments cannot perceive of or calculate, and there could be some effect with that, with the relationship to that idea of it being an electric universe, an electromagnetic system that's actually fueling and running, the stars above, causing the shifts in rotation, causing the shifts in temperature, causing the shifts in weather clouds and weather fronts. So I don't know. Again, I'm speculating about this. I don't know. I'm just looking at from what I've been exposed to and trying to get a handle on this from a layman's perspective. But to me, that seems more reasonable than the heliocentric model that they've given us, and there seems to be the electric universe really holds well in a system, in a potentially closed system / infinite plane system, like a flat plane geometry that appears to be what we're living in.
Just a scientific thought here: would entropy not exist in a closed system if it was a 100% closed environment?
That's a great question. If entropy does exist in a closed system, I think that entropy does exist because, life rises and falls, and we were born and we die, and you can see this. You can see entropy in every form of life. You can see it with the passing of the seasons. You can see it with the passing of age. You can see it with everything. So I don't see why entropy would not also exist. And the cycles of life and the rhythms of life would also exist in a I don't like to use the word closed system, but the flat plane model over the circular deep space model. I don't believe it's a closed system. I think it's an infinite plane, and I can get into the metaphysics of that from my study with astral projection and Robert Monroe's research at the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences and some of the stuff I was involved with in the 90s. But I'm coming at this from a metaphysical perspective. So when I look out at this plane, I see the same geometry that I see on the astral plane when I used to rise up out of my body during hundreds of astral projections that were, inspired during those early years and a lot of that early exploration. I always rose up out of my body into an astral plane. It was always a flat Euclidean plane that I traveled over and across. So if you think of the Hermetic adage of as above, so below, it makes sense to me that the material realm would also be plane geometry. It's the same exact geometry as the other spiritual realms, the higher realms, and that the material realm is actually a flat plane geometry, just like the higher dimensional realms are. This might be based on flat plane geometry opposed to, all the other arguments they have for, I don't know, some of what appears to be some of the nonsense between, around like the space-time theories and outer space, deep space, relativity, gravity, the heliocentrism, Big Bang, NASA nonsense that appears to be completely crumbling on its own footprint at close scrutiny. So I'm turning into what appears to be kind of like a transcendental scientist or a metaphysical scientist or, a science mind that's also a mystic and a spiritualist. So I'm kind of merging all fronts into some unified grand theory, to use their vernacular. But instead of it being the four forces coming together to try to find this grand unified theory, it might be true metaphysical science, or as Johan calls holy science, which is, science and subtle energy merging together into one unified front. I think that's the future of science and where humanity is going, and what part of this great awakening is merging the mystic with logic.
I think that's definitely the way we should be going as far as trying to analyze the true nature of the universe. But Johan, how do you feel about entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, and Watsun threw a lot out there. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't like the word entropy too much, because entropy is only true in a dead world, and in the living world it's neck entropy. Actually, neck entropy is the blueprint, or actually the sign that there is life. What we are producing in this world is actually negative entropy. So I think that whole idea is upside down, and I don't believe any law there of conversation, only within closed systems and only with dead material. But we, conscious beings, we are able to create out of nothing with energies that are not in the textbook, energies that are beyond the physical energies, and they are much more important. We know all about this. Every morning we wake up and we have a lot of energy, and at a certain moment we get really tired and then the energy is gone. But that energy cannot be measured. It's not has to do with the amount of what we've eaten. Yeah, if you're very hungry and suddenly you see a very powerful speech, then you are filled with energy again. Where did it come from? So I don't focus too much on that old-fashioned physics, because to me that's not really helpful.
No, that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. Gentlemen, would you say you hit on the salient points you wanted to make as far as scientific evidence to back up your worldview?
Yeah, there's so many other things I could have brought up, and a lot of other things. But again, I think my basic thing to keep this concise and to the point is that it appears that you can prove to yourself that it appears to be level and flat and motionless. And to me, that's kind of where I'd like to end my general arguments. And people out, in the listening audience can research for themselves, and you can go down an immensely convoluted path in myriad directions researching every topic of this, and I advise that you do, and I definitely have done that myself. And I could also go into a lot of different directions, but for the in the spirit of brevity, I think that I just made my general sentiment that I'm actually just suggesting that it appears to be flat and not round, and using my abilities to do that myself have proven it on a personal level that's what I've discovered.
And how about you, Johan? Do you have any other points you want to address?
Yeah, I think the main problem here, I think I made already all my points, so I don't have anything to put on the table, but I think we jumped to conclusions. It's just like I would ask the two of you, is it Hillary or is it Donald? Yeah, because that's not really the question. The question is not which model is right. I think we should put all the anomalies on the table, and then from there on we should somehow find a solution that fits all the phenomena that we see. And the problem that I have with the flat Earth theory is that it, in my opinion, jumps to a conclusion. There are so many anomalies, and therefore the Earth must be flat. That to me is not sound way of reasoning, and that's why to me it blocked, and somehow the door closed, and I could not put myself to watch any more videos about it, because it's not really helpful. So I think Watson and I can maybe create a bridge through this radio broadcast, so that we can help the communities that are there now, and they are struggling big time, in my opinion, that we somehow help that conflict to end, because it's not about who is right, it's about in what world are we really living in, what is really going on. We have been lied big time by the governments, by NASA, by the universities, but we should not fight each other. Maybe you've seen the film from Monty Python. It's called Life of Brian.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very funny film where the people who want to fight the Romans are actually fighting each other. So they totally forget that the Romans were the bad guys, and not but they are so focused on fighting each other that they don't do it. Yeah, the flat Earth people and the globe Earth people, or how you want to call them, they both know that NASA is lying. So why don't we join instead of fighting each other? I think that's very silly what we're doing.
I completely agree with that, and I'd actually like to really jump into that. What are your thoughts? Let's start with you on this, Johan, since you brought it up, on NASA, what they're lying to us about, and why are they doing it?
NASA has to lie about it because they started lying in 1969 when they broadcast a landing which was not on the surface of the moon Luna, but was at a studio, I think somewhere in England, but it doesn't really matter where it is. It was most certainly not beyond the Van Allen belt, because NASA did not know anything about the Van Allen belt. So they had no measures to protect the astronauts and the plane against that radiation. So NASA is lying from 1969 on. Then at a certain moment they stopped with the lunar missions, manned lunar missions, for some very unclear reason. They say they will start, I think, 2018 again, something like that. But ever since, NASA is lying. The Hubble telescope is within the magnetic sphere of our planet, so it's not that far away. And I distrust every image that comes from NASA, because NASA knows that the universe is different than the models that we have learned. And that's why they have to continue this lie. But I'm 100% certain that the Russians were laughing very hard when they saw that fake lunar landing in 1969, because it is technically impossible with the Apollo technology to go there and to come back. It's not possible.
I completely agree with you, Johan. I'm 100% convinced that we never went to the moon. I've done all the research. I've been studying that for years. Some of, like, without referencing all the, exciting research around that everybody's probably generally familiar with, we can completely 100% agree that NASA is completely full of fakery, shenanigans, deception. But I would take it one step further and say that I don't believe anything that NASA has ever done. I don't believe in satellites. I don't believe in the Hubble Space Telescope. I think the International Space Station is a fakery. If you use the same critical analysis that you do when you dig into the fake Apollo missions and see the monstrous amount of deception, anomalies, and problems with of critiquing and digging into that narrative, you can have the same critical analysis on satellites, on the International Space Station, on Hubble Space, and also the Hubble Space Telescope, and also on this ridiculous notion that we actually landed rovers on Mars and that there's deep space voyage satellites, that just passed Pluto and all that stuff. I remember back when I used to be jokingly called, quote, a baller. In the 2012 era, I used to listen to Coast voraciously, and it was at the time that the Curiosity mission was landed on Mars. And, being my general space guy and into space everything, I was following that story like a hound, and I devoured everything. I was showing people all the cool footage, and I was actually listening to Coast at the time when they supposedly landed that ill-fated fake hoax on that ill-fated fake luminary. And I've come to believe that everything NASA says is a lie. So my question to you, Johan, is why would an organization that's so insidious and diabolical, that would do such a monstrous hoax and scam on the world population, why do they have any credibility or credence to believe that anything that they've done since then is true? And how could you not critically wonder why an organization of deception like that wouldn't also maybe be the same people behind all kinds of deception and false flags and manipulations, and possibly maybe even a 500-year-old high Masonic Jesuit order deception of a fake heliocentric model? I guess the general sentiment is that how can you believe in or critically look at NASA but not be suspicious of the entire organization and everything they've ever represented, and any groups like the Freemasons that have ever been affiliated or associated with them?
And that to me goes too far. A friend of mine is working with satellites, and he's doing telecommunication, and he operates them, and they know exactly where they are, and they have a lot of very advanced software to make that all happen. And there is telecommunication possible via the satellite. So I don't have any reason to say that they are not there. And there are people who are going to. Yeah, in the Netherlands there are 2 astronauts that became really famous because they also went to a space station. Actually it's not real space station. I dislike that word very much. If you look up what the name NASA means, it says arrow in the word arrow. Yeah, it's an aero station, not a space station. They're still up in the air. It's high up in the air. With an airplane you go up to about 10 kilometers. And with those advanced aeroplanes of NASA, you go up to 400, 500 kilometers, 600 maximum. But that's it. They don't go really into space. It's still the Earth's atmosphere they're all in. So
do they call it aero?
Yeah. Look up what the name is. It's
the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
It's aeronautics. It's not astronautics. It's aeronautics. They're very clear about it.
I just made that connection with the word arrow as a symbolic form of the vector symbol that they use in all their logos. On that NASA symbol, it has that vector symbol, which also looks like an arrow. So aeronautics or arrow, so again, I think it might be that occulted vector symbol. Again, we can agree to disagree on that one. What I see when I look at the footage, and me being a visual artist, and I'm looking at the International Space Station, I'm looking at the video footage of the International Space Station of Earth. I never see any video proof of any satellites. And the one thing that blows me away is if satellites are traveling at 17 to 18,000 miles per hour around the Earth, and there's up to 15 to 25,000 of these spinning all at once. Why don't, one, we never hear of any crashes, we never see explosions up in the sky like we would see, if they crashed into each other. And two, you think there would be a whole culture and a whole subgenre of photography, of photographers mounting GoPro cameras and really high-end cameras on top of their friends' satellites and paying them a few $1,000s a month to do that so they could have access to the Earth and take beautiful photographs and stunning photographs. There'd be tabletop books of the Earth from the vantage point of famous photographers' satellites. Like if I was a photographer and I had the money, I would put a camera on a satellite. I know they'll probably say they can't do it because it's for military issues or reconnaissance or for security or homeland security. But still, you'd think there would be some video footage or some type of amazing video footage of this whole ocean of busy, bustling, rush hour traffic of these 20,000 satellites spinning around at some maddening pace. But you don't see one video ever, one photo. I've never seen a video or a photo that's not a CGI fakery. So to me, that begs the question: is this part of the trickery? Is this part of the mind control? Is this part of the indoctrination? Is this part of the scam? And also all the photos, if you said that you don't believe or trust any of the photos from the Hubble Space Telescope, then why do you even think that there's one up there?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to make those pictures with that kind of resolution. So, but yeah, of course you can question anything. I've not been near the telescope, the Hubble telescope. I've not been in the International Space Station. I've not been in a space shuttle or an aero shuttle. So I don't know all that, but yeah, you have to draw a line in my.
I would like you to see. It would be fun to maybe connect your friend with Jason, and maybe Jason could have a little interview with him about his connection to being able to have this technology to manipulate and control and be in direct contact with a satellite that's up there. Is because I would love to pursue that lead and see what that person thinks about this insane controversy on whether satellites exist or not.
Well, let's talk about satellites for a minute. Johan, what would you say would be the direct evidence that there really are satellites in space?
There is a lot of money going on, not only for spying, but also for telecommunications. And for instance, we can now connect with each other through, I think, through a satellite. I don't think it's going through a cable under the Atlantic Ocean. But actually, I don't really know how we are talking right now. But it's so, we are so used to using satellites for GPS and all those technologies. I have no reason to doubt it.
I think that the overwhelming proof that satellites do not exist is the stunning amount of. I'm assuming I stepped in there right at the right time. Did I interrupt you, Johan?
No, I don't have any any points here to make.
One of the things, the big elephant in the room with this topic is that there's an epidemic, a virus of cell phone tower masks that are destroying our landscape and flooding us with a resonance frequency that's interrupting the resonance frequency and the human resonance of the Earth itself, of Gaia. And there's this like millions of these cell phone tower masks that are put all over this flat plane. Those things are being used to triangulate GPS and for cell phones, which again, there's an epidemic of cell phones too. There's millions, if not billions, of them out there. They've Trojan horsed the NSA into the control system. They've got every motherfucker carrying around one of these cell phones. And you think those cell phones are communicating with satellites up there when they have millions of these cell phone tower masks, peppering our landscape like a ugly tree in the sky? And then on top of that, I think it's something as high as 90 to 95% of all of the world's communications are in fiber optic cables that are put under the seabeds and connecting all of the countries and all the world powers together, so that this fucking, I don't mean to cuss, so that the internet can run all its communications. So we have a huge industry of fiber optic cables crisscrossing all the oceans, and then this incredible epidemic of cell phone tower masks all for GPS and cell phones. Why would they even need satellites? No, I thought satellites were doing all this communication. Aren't our phones going up to a satellite, to a communications satellite? What's the point of even having satellites?
No, I can tell you that cell phones work off of towers. That I do know.
Absolutely they do. Look what happens in part when you go into dead zones, when you're traveling, when you go into less populated areas, or when you go hiking the Appalachian Mountain Range and you go into areas where there's no cell phone tower masks. Why do you get a reception when you go up onto a summit of a mountain on a path way out in the wilderness? But if you go into a valley, you go into a dead zone. If there were satellites that we were communicating with, there would not be one spot on this rotating global Earth that you could go that a satellite wouldn't reach, and you would have great reception anywhere and everywhere, valley deep, mountain high. But that's not the case. It's all ground-based cell phone triangulation.
There are sat phones. It's very well known that there are sat phones, and mobile devices don't claim to use satellites. The reason why they call them cells is because everything that a mobile phone uses is broken up into a cell, and if you get outside a particular cell, that's why you would have a diminished signal. I can honestly say that I don't think that's an argument for whether satellites do or don't exist. I also know people who had phones. I'm old enough that I remember sat phones being the only thing you could get in the 80s. My father had one, for instance, for his job. So I don't think that's necessarily conclusive evidence. And Johan, I don't know if you'd like to contribute to that.
Yeah, we have in the Netherlands many immigrants from Morocco and Turkey, and they don't like the television that they get from the cable, so they all buy a satellite dish and put it on the balcony and aim it at a satellite, and they have to aim it correctly in order to get a signal. So they're aiming at something up in the sky, and I don't think that's a huge tower. So to me, that's also a clue that there is something that's giving them a signal which they can then use to watch their own television program in their own language.
I also remember those from the 80s too. My father had several friends who had and back in those days, it wasn't like the small little DirecTV ones we have nowadays. They were like giant things that looked like something out of NASA, and you indeed would pick up things from other countries with it.
Mm-hmm. But maybe we can come to a kind of synergy. I think Watsun made his points. I made my points. I still think we jump to conclusion, but there is something fishy. So maybe we can use this program to reach out to each other, because I think there's too much tension now, and people get really upset. I was in Denmark for the Open Mind Conference. I was there last year too, and I already got a question from a very fanatic flat earther, and this year he was trying to talk to me again, but he became very abusive, and I don't think it's good, because he's a really nice guy. But the moment he sees that I don't agree with him, he becomes angry and starts to call me all kinds of names. And I don't see why we should do that.
I agree with you completely there. I keep seeing this being repeated, and is actually why I wanted to do this program, was so that it could be discussed in a format that does not turn into a whole bunch of aggression from either side. And I look at a lot of forums, I listen to a lot of talk radio, and I'm friends with different truth researchers all over the world. Actual big shout out to Mark Devlin for actually helping me to arrange this show, because he knew both of you, just to use him as an example.
Mark's amazing.
He's a great guy, and thank you, Mark. But that's my whole point, is that I do speak to a lot of people all over the world who are all challenging the mainstream point of view like we are all doing. But when it comes to this flat earth, round earth thing, all of a sudden there's this huge wall that gets struck and causes a whole lot of tension. And I think this needs to be dealt with in a very different way.
I think laughter, joy, compassion, love should be used. I hang out with and I research a lot of researchers that are not flat earthers. I've actually, some of my favorite researchers have publicly dismissed it or don't want anything to do with it, and I still listen. I still follow their material, and I still find them to be genuine. I think it's one of those topics that is. At least from my perspective, I don't judge somebody if they're not behind this or not. I think it's the most fascinating thing that's ever happened to me, and maybe because I've always been such a space guy, I just grabbed onto it like wildfire, because all of a sudden I had this beautiful handle on what appears to be this beautiful, stunning, flat, terra firma, infinite plane cosmology, and it's blown my mind, and it's influenced my artwork. I'm making artwork. I'm doing paintings, doing drawings, illustrations. I'm coming up with sigils. All the artwork I'm making is inspired by this narrative. While at the same time, it's not my main identity. I'm focusing on all these other topics. I'm researching all these other things, and I'm still loyal to all these other researchers. So I think if I was to give advice to people out there, is that to just lighten the fuck up and relax a little bit, whatever model that you align with. I think we can casually have a conversation. We can agree to disagree. And Johan and I have similarities that, I'm really curious about his holy science and the metaphysics and transcendental narrative and things around that him and I can connect with. And we don't have to focus on this flat earth thing. If I ran into Johan at the Open Mind conference there, I'd totally hang out with them and we'd connect on all these other issues. A lot of the researchers and friends that I have, if they don't want to talk about it, I don't talk about it. I hung out with again, I don't really want to name drop, but I've hung out with quite a few people, and I'm connected with a few, and if they don't want to bring it up, then I just simply don't. So I don't judge people. I'm really relaxed, and I think the general sentiment is to have love and compassion for people in whatever way that they might be in their path. And if they don't want to talk about this, or if this just challenges too many paradigms and it's a little bit too heavy to deal with, then sidestep it and talk about other things that you're connected to or that you're kindred with. So,
and Johan, how do you feel about all this? Since you do go to a lot of conferences and speak at them and interact with a lot of people in different countries, how are you seeing the whole movement of flat Earth versus round Earth translating over to everyone?
It seems to me like the good old, I would say, divide and conquer strategy, because now the truth movement is divided, just like we had the 9/11 also, the non-plane and the plane group. So that's not really helpful. We both know something is wrong, and instead of helping each other to find the truth, we start to attack the other group because they don't believe what we believe. And to me, that's not really useful. And what's also a little bit disturbing to me, I'm now very into the end times prophecies of the Bible, and I don't want to scare the two of you, but the times are coming really close, and I think the USA will be a major player in what is going to happen very soon. So instead of focusing on is it a flat plane or is it a sphere, I think we are about to enter a third world war, according to the prophecy of Daniel, if it's all true. Because I know that the people who try to run the show on this planet, they take this prophecy very literal and they want to make it come true. And if they get their way, then nobody's worrying anymore whether it's flat or a sphere, because we're all in deep shit.
Well, I completely agree with that.
I agree with that.
It's almost like we're being distracted as a whole away from what I would say are much more important issues. And I think we're all in agreement on that, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, of course. Of course, I had to make time free for this because my main focus is now to show what is really there in the Bible, because the words that we have in English, they are not always correct. And I go back now to the original Greek version, and then I see that some verses are completely mistranslated. And if you correct it, it starts to make a lot of more sense. And then it becomes really important to know what is written down, because I think the people from the past, they really had visions. I know Watsun has his journeys, he said, astral journeys, but those people, they saw something coming to us that is so big that they had to write it down. And if they are right, then yeah, it's a real changer of the whole of reality.
And what language are you translating that from?
From Greek, but I didn't have Greek at school, so I use internet to do it word by word. It takes a lot of time, but there are some good translations. But if you, for instance, take the King James version, there's so many errors there. It's actually, yeah, it's a disgrace, to be honest.
That doesn't surprise me at all, to be honest with you.
No, and of course there's a reason too. We talked about the lies of NASA, but yeah, we can also talk about the Jesuits and the papal criminal organization, if I can call it like that. Yeah. So religion is used to mind control people big time as well, and especially in the USA, there's so many people who call themselves Christians, but they have no idea that Christianity has been perverted by the Roman Catholic organization. So true Christianity has nothing to do with most things in the Bible. You need to have the original writings from the apostles and the prophets from the ancient times, and then you can make some more sense out of it. So that's what I'm focusing on right now, and it takes me all my time, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of those ancient scriptures are riddled with all kinds of Gnostic truth. And I think one of the things that I resonate with, outside of everything that you just spoke of, is that a lot of the ancient scriptures appear to be also as an undercurrent, very sympathetic to this, to the flat Earth cosmogony. But on another note, when it comes to resonating with or trying to deal with this topic about this flat Earth thing in the truth community at large, one of the things that I've always done is I'm a generalist with my research. I'm the same way with artwork. I like to get involved. Over the years, I've fiddled with every type of medium you can imagine, and I'm well versed in almost any type of artwork that deals with any discipline or any medium. And on the same note, when it comes to my research over the years and the type of topics I'm interested in, I'm a generalist. I study and focus in on almost every topic imaginable and get a little bit of handle on it, and then I move on to the next topic. So for me, I think the flat Earth thing should be something that everybody should at least spend a little bit of time with, and then move on to other passions or other interests. I've actually had a really difficult time because I've been really heavily invested in digging and researching into what appears to be an enormous psyop connected to in the same train of thoughts from Mark Devlin in Musical Truth and Dave McGowan's Weird Tales from the Canyon, all the way up into this new research that Jan Irving and Joe Atwell are doing with the dark occulted underbelly of the Burning Man Festival. And me being kind of a renegade misfit, radical, rebel rouser, mischief brewer, paradigm smasher, bohemian, sympathetic on the fringes of this culture. I've always been connected, in close proximity to a lot of the Burning Man community, a lot of the bohemian New Age community, and to think that there's some darker undercurrents to that. So the general sentiment, though, is I'm researching a lot of different things, and I'm all over the place. And I think that for me, that's a good way for me to get a handle on this big picture. So when guys like, Johan, who I can tell has a big heart and he's super genuine and serious, when he's focusing his interest on translating the ancient scriptures, I'm all ears. I'm totally into it. It doesn't matter what, all researchers have something to say and they've got something to bring to the table. So in the defense of the flat earth movement, I think it's something that everybody should put some time into and either realize that it's completely flat and level and stationary like I have, or they can get on the philosophical fence and stay neutral, which I think is an impressive perch to be, or they can, remain and hold on to the heliocentric model. But it doesn't matter what somebody's opinion is in one of those three camps. All that matters is that we should stay together as a united front, because we do have some really dark forces at play here that are manipulating us. And I personally think that this flat earth movement was a natural awakening. I don't think it was a psyop. I don't think it was put there to divide us. I think it's just another riddle in this big puzzle. And when the biggest psyop of all is to realize they've lied to us about this. And if they can lie to us about the ground we're standing on, then these guys can lie to us and have lied to us about almost every other thing in the human experience. So all of a sudden you suspiciously will start looking at everything from 9/11 to the false flags, Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, the Orlando shootings, transhumanism, GMOs, geoengineering, go down the list of all these heavy topics, and everything is under close scrutiny. So one of the intellectual exercises that this gave me was to critically look at the data and to see for myself whether I could see that it was flat or round. And to me, it's overwhelmingly flat. And then I had a really hard time getting ready for the show because I have not been focused on this flat earth research for a few months. I've kind of already passed that Rubicon, and I was galloping past it and kind of, headlong into the trenches of a lot of other research. So to me, it's one of those things you take in briefly and you come to terms with it in whatever dark night of the soul you're going to have, and then you move on to other research. And all of us should be united as a collective resistance of sentient light beings that are coming together as a truth and alt community, as a united front against this, this control matrix. So my message is always compassion and community and love and kinship and and coming together as a united front, opposed to division. So I personally believe, from my perspective, that this has actually made me a stronger, more awakened researcher and seeker of wisdom, and that I'm more ready to gallop down any and every forbidden path that no one else is willing to go down. So I've got all my guns out. I'm going to die with my boots on, and I'm pushing headstrong into this research. And honestly, I'm kind of done with the flat earth stuff for now, and I'm pushing headstrong forward into a lot of other topics. I'm really interested in what Johan has to, where he's taking some of his research too, because a lot of that stuff fascinates me. Some of the biblical and scriptural translations is not my specialty, but I'm very kindred and sympathetic to it, because it seems to be coming from a place of love and true caring for the human condition.
Well, I think this is a great way for us to wind down and sign off, because we did hit on a lot of topics. But Johan, let's hear a lot about what you're working on right now before we sign off for the day.
Yeah, I'm looking at what's going to happen in the very near future. And what if I told you that it doesn't matter if Trump or Clinton wins the election on November 8th, because neither of them will be inaugurated on January the 20th. Barack Obama will continue to be the president of the USA, but then under martial law. That's the prediction that I'm doing here. That is the prediction I'm doing here in the show. And if I'm wrong, then you can you can mock me as much as you want. But I think that will be the way to bring us into the Third World War.
Now, Johan, I hear a lot of people out there saying that. Can you say why you feel that way? And it seems that Watsun agrees with you as well.
It seems reasonable.
Please continue, Watson. Then I do.
Oh, no, I don't want to interrupt you, but I definitely can see something, some variation of that happening, and I would not be surprised if the elections were compromised and if he was put in place and some type of crisis scenario happened and martial law was established. But again, it's all speculation. But I just think we're being ran by psychopaths at the helm of a diabolical, super dark, evil cabal, and that anything could happen, however tragic or cataclysmic it could be. I wouldn't put them past it. I think that in part that's why they don't care that this flat Earth conversation is going to get out. Similar to the Johan sentiment, is that it's not going to matter if they collapse the if a third world war happens, because the last thing you're going to be wondering about, if the Earth is flat or round, is where you're going to eat next, or what kind of shelter you'll have, or what paramilitary hired thugs from some Blackwater front's going to be rolling up on your street trying to disarm you, or what kind of pandemic they're going to unleash on us. I don't know. I mean, there's so many possibilities of that. Not that that's going to happen, but I would not be surprised if something shocking was in the not so distant future.
As a humanity, we need a global implosion. All the systems are corrupt, the financial system, the healthcare system, you know all that. And we are not able to break free of that because most people have too much interest in keeping the status quo. And the people who want that, they already have the money and the power. So nothing is going to change unless we have to change. And we get a sense of urgency when there is a huge global crisis. And of course, a war between Russia and the USA is such a global crisis, especially if China joins it. So, and I think it's necessary. Of course, many people will have a really tough time and there will be many casualties, but I think humanity needs this kind of huge transformation process in order to break free from the major corruption at all levels. Yeah, including NASA, including everything we discussed here, but it goes as deeper as many people can suspect, because most of the things that we are taught at school, they are wrong. They're all part of a mind control program, and the only way to break free from it is to let it all collapse, and then we can all start from a clean sheet. So I think that's the future that we will live in very soon. So it will not be the next generation. We are the generation of the end times. I'm 100% certain of that. And that means that we need to prepare. We need to prepare for the tough times that are going. We should not go into fear. That's not helping. But we should be aware that what Daniel, the prophet that Daniel was speaking about, is about to happen.
Well, they've done it before. The 20th century was riddled with one, a war after another, and the democide that occurred to the general populace was just another form of a killing machine that was probably based on some eugenics agenda. But it's wild. You got to look at the past and see what they did in the 20th century to us, and why wouldn't they herald in another golden era of military industrial suppression? That's why, in part, I think that they don't care about all this stuff getting out and all of us talking, because if something tragic happens, the last thing we're going to have is to be able to sit around and casually be philosophical about the control system that just pulled the plug on us all. We're going to be worried about a lot other more intense things.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with both of you there.
Yeah, can I end with a kind of a closing note that generally celebrates, I think, what's happening in the truth movement or the alt movement, is that everybody is really seeking the similar things, similar to what Jason said earlier. We're all in search of Gnostic wisdom. We're all in search of truth. We're pining to have a handle on the human condition. We're trying to get control of a riddle or a conundrum to maybe get us closer to the source, or get us closer to maybe our true self, or to a closer feeling of oneness with this big divine riddle. And there's this awesome kind of Gandhi quote that I found in my research I'd like to kind of throw out there really quick, and it's a pretty powerful, so I'll say it concisely. Here we go. Gandhi. Many people, especially ignorant people, want to punish you for speaking the truth, for being correct, for being you. Never apologize for being correct or for being years ahead of your time. If you're right and you know it, speak your mind. Speak your mind, even if you are a minority of one. The truth is still the truth. And the convoluted tapestry of truthers out there, we're all seeking the same thing. We're all working on our different parts of this big tapestry, and everything, every topic, every researcher, every field of inquiry is just as important as the other, and that we should all just continue to seek the truth and know that what we're doing is right and that we're on the right path, and that, you know, whatever our karmic imprint is going to be in whatever fate we might have, at least we can rise up on the far side of the transcendental mystic veil of death and know that we fought the good fight, and we'll be reincarnated on the other side of the resistance with this long lineage of light workers and truth seekers. So I'm going down with my boots on, and I'm gonna go up against this system of lies and deception with no reservations. And I'm going to continue to rise up incarnation after incarnation and continue to fight against these dark forces that are inhibiting the human experience.
Wonderful. Johan, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I want to finish it right here and right now. I'm not going to do another incarnation. I'm fed up. I really want to end this because there is so much suffering going on, and it's completely unnecessary. And
yeah.
it hurts me a lot. It causes me a lot of trouble, pain, and it's so unnecessary. And the psychopaths that are running the show, they are so sick. So I want to end their game for once and for all. So I'm determined. And it's not that I don't dare to speak. It's my life mission to end this. And of course I cannot do it alone. And I'm very happy that I meet fantastic guys like you, because together we can convince the majority, who are still very oblivious to so many things, that something is completely wrong. And we can solve this the moment we join hands and the moment we realize that it's less than 1% who is fucking it up, excuse my French, for the rest of us. And it's time that we bring them out of power and take the power back to the people.
I think we're all in agreement on that. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your time and all of your efforts. Watsun, why don't you go ahead and say where people can find you if they want to look into your work further?
Absolutely. I've got a website, WatsonAtkinsun.com. It's spelled WATSUN. ATKINSUN.com. I changed the spelling from the traditional format to have two suns at the end of both of those names in celebration of what I consider the two luminaries above, the sun and the moon, appear to be radiating in their own divine glory. So that's the name. You can find it .com. The same name. I'm also on Instagram. You can see a lot of my artwork, a lot of my tattoos, and you can follow me on there. And I've also got a YouTube channel under the same name, with which have not been active on at all for years. It doesn't have any followers. It's barely had any activity. But I recently uploaded a video called Flat Earth Artwork that you can check out, and it shows you a lot of my artwork that is related to this Flat Earth inspiration. And also there's some older videos in there of me doing performance art, reading poetry on the streets, busking poetry on the street, me doing other performance art, a lot of mystic poets I was into, like Attar and Rumi and Hafiz. It has me reading some of their poetry. I've also written some mystic poetry myself. There's a long-winded piece called Ocean of Twine that you can take a look at. But yeah, those are my three places, and I'm planning on becoming much more active with distributing poster art that's consciousness-based, truth-based, with a flat earth undertone and a truth overtone, and also trying to come out more and speak freely to the general populace and to the resistance at large that's part of this community in similar podcasts like this. And wanted to thank Jason for the opportunity to do this, and also thank Johan for his charming and sweet debate and insight on everything that he shared with us. And thank you guys, it's been wonderful.
Johan, you're a researcher, an author, scientist, lecturer. Where can people find you?
Yeah, the website I already mentioned is holyscience.org with W-double-L, holy, so it's about the whole, and holy with H-O-L-Y means full of holes, so I don't want to have to do anything with that kind of holy, but the wholeness. And I've written 37 books so far, but lately I switched to videos. I think people are a little bit bored by reading books, and my YouTube channel is very active, but you find all the information on that website, holyscience.org.
Wow. 37 books. That's fantastic. Hey, maybe we can exchange some. I'll send you some posters. You could send me one, a book or two. And I'd like to offer that to both of you guys too. And anywhere out there in the Cyberland too that would like a complimentary poster, if you mention that you heard the show on Secrets of Saturn here, just send me your address, and anywhere on the flat plane, I'll send you a complimentary collection of posters, of some poster art.
Well, I have to say I'm really pleased with the way this turned out. Everybody kept their cool. Nobody got angry at each other. You just discussed points that you felt were very relevant to the discussion. And gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and efforts, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Watsun. Bye for now.
Absolutely. Be safe. Peace.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. We just had a debate, if you will, on one of the hottest topics, if not the hottest topic, in alternative media today. This is causing a whole lot of division amongst the truth movement, and I wanted to do a show where this topic could be discussed without any sort of negativity or aggression being brought into the mix. And I think we accomplished that. As always, I invite you to do your own homework, research well, and make your own decisions. But to both of my guests, I say thank you for being outstanding individuals and for just being really cool about the whole thing. Until next time, thank you for listening.